In the July summer of 1863, less than 2 weeks after the bloody battle at Gettysburg, Lower Manhattan erupted into violence as the now infamous New York City draft riots began. Playing upon pre-existing class and racial tensions within New York's largely Irish working class, the riots began as a response to the Union draft. All male citizens between 20 and 35 and all unmarried men between 35 and 45 years of age were subject to military duty. The federal government entered all eligible men into a lottery. Those who could afford to hire a substitute or pay the government $300 might avoid enlistment. Blacks, who were not considered citizens, were exempt from the draft. The exemptions for African Americans denied citizenship, as well as those able to afford the $300 exemption fee, made the rioters susceptible to inflammatory rhetoric from those who opposed the war. With many made to believe that their already limited political and economic statuses would be further dwindled by forced competition with African Americans following the abolition of slavery, the racial tensions continued to rise and led to rioters attacking black neighborhoods, black-owned businesses, and looting the colored orphan asylum on Fifth Avenue before setting it ablaze and leaving its 233 children forced into an almshouse. The destruction would live on in infamy as one of the worst race riots in American history, and would not be rivaled until nearly a century later with the Watts riots of LA during the hot summer of 1965. Lasting roughly 4 days, the riots of 1863 were quelled with the arrival of state militias and federal troops who, along with police, confronted the rioters. Although exact death tolls are unknown, 11 black men were lynched throughout the course of the riots. Serving as governor at the time, Horatio Seymour, a hunker Democrat, was a vocal critic of Lincoln while tacitly supporting the war. 5 years after the riots were over, in 1868, Seymour ran against Ulysses S. Grant in the 1868 presidential race. Unsurprisingly, he did not support Reconstruction policies and branded himself as the white man's candidate. Born in New York City over a year before the draft riots began was Edith Newbold Jones. Although her father would have seemingly met the requirements for the Union draft, the wealth from the family-owned Chemical Bank of New York would have easily afforded him an exemption. Although Jones was born in New York, she spent much of her life abroad, especially in France, where she would later live and write under the more familiar name Edith Wharton. Like the characters she often wrote about in her novels, Edith Wharton was born thoroughly bourgeois into an upper-class New York family with links to the moneyed Dutch patroon families of old New York. From a young age, and for much of her life, Wharton and family would make frequent trips to the continent, where she had governesses that would tutor her in French, German, and Italian. Wharton took a keen interest in writing from an early age, and would pen and sell her first written work, Fast and Loose, a novelette, at only 14. Her early literary pursuits were not fostered by her household, but rather discouraged, especially by her mother, Lucretia Stevens Rhinelander, perhaps her greatest critic. Wharton's mother was not only critical of her daughter's writings from a young age, but even forbade her to read novels until marriage. Unsurprisingly, Wharton's anger and estrangement from her own mother is a theme that appears throughout and haunts her fiction. Following in the footsteps and traditions of Austen, Eliot, and the Bronte sisters, Wharton's fiction explores realism and social critique in regards to female experiences. Themes that run throughout her work, and in The Age of Innocence in particular, include the restrictions placed upon bourgeois women, claustrophobic confinement of marriage, divorce, and the social strain it placed upon women, and the repression of female sexuality. Her works reflect her own class standing and social upbringing, a factor that would serve as a point of contention for her critics. Detractors, like John C. Underwood, said of her work, "A patrician quality of the superficial, by the superficial, for the superficial. It is intrinsically alien to the genius of the Anglo-Saxon world, in particular to that of its male half, and the great mass of the world in general has some reason for looking at it with suspicion." Wharton's cleverness and perceived superficiality were used as thinly veiled sexist critiques by which to demean and discredit her abilities as an author of fiction. Ironically enough, such critiques regarding superficiality within her novels miss the point and fail to see how Wharton employs superficiality as a social critique. The shallow and often superficial nature of old New York society as it appears in the Age of Innocence displays Wharton's keen ability to satirize and bring to life the hypocrisies that made up so much of its customs, rituals, and expectations. Cousin Ellen Olenska, from her troubled marriage and subsequent affair with Archer, though unconsummated, to her eventual abandonment of New York to permanently reside in Paris, bears resemblance to Edith Wharton's own life. It could be said that Newland's repression and nearly 30-year marriage is also reflective of Wharton's personal experience. Edith married Edward Robbins Wharton, known as Teddy, in 1885 when she was only 23 years old. Though initially filled with intellectual discussion, travel, and expensive housing, the marriage became an unhappy one. Her husband, Teddy, suffered from melancholia, and his mental state gradually declined throughout the remainder of their marriage. 16 years into their marriage, in 1901, Wharton purchased 113 acres in Lenox, Massachusetts. She designed and had built the estate known as The Mount. The main house sits at 4 stories in an area of 16,850 square feet. Residing at the Mount for a decade, this period was deeply formative for Wharton and her fiction. Despite the strain of an increasingly suffocating marriage, Wharton found the freedom to explore gardening, architecture, interior design, as well as a return to writing fiction. It was here that she wrote her famous novel, The House of Mirth, in 1905, as well as her critically acclaimed short story, Ethan Frome, in 1911. It was also during this period, in 1908, when Edith Wharton would begin her affair with the journalist and foreign correspondent Morton Fullerton, introduced by their mutual friend, author Henry James. Discussing the Mount, Wharton once wrote in a letter to Fullerton, "I am amazed at the success of my efforts. Decidedly, I'm a better landscape gardener than novelist, and this place, every line of which is my own work, far surpasses the House of Mirth." In 1911, the Whartons sold the estate, and the buckling marriage finally broke under pressure from Teddy's long, declining mental state, ending in divorce in 1913. After the end of her marriage, Edith moved to France, where she would permanently reside for the remaining 24 years of her life, remaining there even after the outbreak of the First World War, in which she devoted herself to humanitarian aid to help with the war effort, which would later earn her the French Legion of Honor in 1916. It was this period, after the war, in 1919, that Wharton would come to write The Age of Innocence, which would be published in 1920, the same year that women's suffrage was ratified by the 19th Amendment, and resulted in Edith Wharton becoming the first woman to win a Pulitzer Prize. Wharton died on August 11, 1937, and is buried in Versailles. From the very opening of the novel, the audience is given a glimpse into the shallow yet complex social games that make up the polite society of New York in the 1870s. The subtle distinctions between carriages, Newland's 2 silver-backed brushes, and his gardenia boutonniere, and of course the debate between pumps and patent leather Oxfords, of which Larry Lefferts is an unquestioned expert. So important are the subtle distinctions, such as when to arrive fashionably late to the opera. New York was a metropolis, and perfectly aware that in metropolises, it was not the thing to arrive early at the opera. And what was or was not the thing played a part as important in Newland Archer's New York as the inscrutable totem terrors that had ruled the destinies of his forefathers thousands of years ago. Wharton makes clear from the onset of the novel that the world in which these characters occupy is a deeply insulated and remote world, existing apart from and yet completely reliant upon the lower classes by which they sustain their lifestyles. Even preferring the aging opera house, in part due to its inconvenience, the world of fashion was still content to reassemble every winter in the shabby red and gold boxes of the sociable old academy. Conservatives cherished it for being small and inconvenient, and thus keeping out the new people whom New York was beginning to dread and yet be drawn to. Outside of New York society itself, the Age of Innocence primarily focuses on three main characters: Newland Archer, May Welland, and Countess Ellen Olenska. All three are introduced within the opening of the novel, as they all attend a performance of Gounod's Faust. Newland is a young and prideful lawyer, newly engaged to May Welland, and from the beginning engages in daydreams and fantasies, with the thrill of possessorship of his perceived masculine duties to educate his young wife, and read Faust together by the Italian lakes. May and Ellen, cousins, are introduced at the same event, and surrounded by peering eyes and gossip that they are more intrigued with rumors regarding Ellen than they are with the ongoing opera performance. Newly returned from Europe to escape an unhappy marriage to a Polish count and seek a divorce, Ellen's long absence from New York society has made her a foreigner on her native soil, a prodigal cousin that is superficially welcomed, but is all but openly gossiped about and ridiculed both for her desire to seek divorce as well as rumors regarding her infidelity in a loveless marriage. Although initially pitying Ellen, when Newland is implored to become her lawyer and to convince her to reconcile with her husband in Europe, the two gradually fall in love with one another, despite Newland's engagement to her cousin, May. What results is a passionate, yet ultimately unconsummated love affair. Wharton herself, having a keen interest and robust understanding of then-contemporary anthropology, often describes her New York through an anthropological lens, framing the customs and ceremonies as belonging to a vanishing tribe. The tribal comparison occurs throughout the novel, as well as comparison to prehistory. As when Mrs. Welland, who knew exactly why Archer had pressed her to announce her daughter's engagement at the Beaufort Hall, and had indeed expected him to do no less, yet felt obliged to simulate reluctance, in the air of having had her hand forced, quite as, in books on primitive man, that people of advanced culture were beginning to read, the savage bride is dragged with shrieks from her parents' tent. The genealogical distinctions of disparate family branches, the innuendos of gestures, the material, finery, and props, as well as the appropriate vocabulary and intonation, all serve to keep the leisure class distinct and guarded from outsiders. The unnamed narrator of the novel notes that the upper class of this society is both drawn to new people, but simultaneously dreads them. In reality, they all lived in a kind of hieroglyphic world, where the real thing was never said or done or even thought, but only represented by a set of arbitrary signs. It can be said that Wharton's anthropological approach and artistic realism hints that there is perhaps a simple, uncomplicated kernel beneath the gilded layers of bourgeois games. The true illusion doesn't lay in the gilding, the rules and false politeness that mark and separate the upper class, but rather in the illusion that a true or real kernel lies beneath the mask of polite society, The elaborate rituals don't conceal the real personal relations covered up by polite society, but rather they conceal that this illusion of an authentic real is a fiction that is sustained by the bourgeois games themselves. The same illusory obfuscation also applies to the relationship between Ellen and Newland within the novel. Newland's likely insincere criticisms of his patriarchal class society in no way undermines or weakens upper-class culture or institutions, but may paradoxically strengthen them by means of disavowal. In the 5th chapter of the novel, Newland, after discussing a rumor that Ellen Olenska may have had an extramarital affair with a secretary, declares to Sillerton Jackson, the premier expert on the latest gossip, "Who had the right to make her life over if she hadn't? I'm sick of the hypocrisy that would bury alive a woman of her age if her husband prefers to live with harlots." He stopped and turned away angrily to light his cigar. "Women ought to be free as we are," he declared, making a discovery of which he was too irritated to measure the terrific consequences. Mr. Sillerton Jackson stretched his ankles near the coals and emitted a sardonic whistle. "Well," he said after a pause, "apparently Count Olinsky takes your view, for I never heard of his having lifted a finger to get his wife back." Ultimately, Newland's declarations, as well as his unconsummated love affair, are not enough to disrupt Newland's place within the hierarchy of old New York City. He is outwitted, and his affair is stifled by May herself, who tells Ellen and her now husband Newland that she is pregnant. With this revelation, Newland sacrifices his relationship with Ellen, as well as his plan to escape with her to Europe, and Ellen returns to the continent permanently, ending their love affair. And so Newland subsumes the identity of the father and falls back firmly into his expected place among the bourgeois of old New York. The passionate relationship between Newland and Ellen is not more just or authentic than Newland's engagement to May. The transgressive nature of the affair, in the face of Newland's engagement and subsequent marriage, is what sustains Newland's desire for Ellen, an outsider, an other within the world that he occupies and participates within. Through Lacanian lens, it could be asserted that Newland Archer's desire is not for Countess Ellen herself, but for the transgressive desire itself. In the face of his engagement and later marriage to May Welland, and the social expectations of settling down and starting a normative family, Olenska stands in for a kind of controlled passion that does not seek to upend or prevent his coming engagement, but ultimately acts as an outburst which sustains and solidifies his marriage and role in society among the leisure class. Newland ultimately assumes the mantle of father, husband, and patriarch in a society that greatly benefits him, unwilling or unable to exit from the symbolic order of old New York society. In returning to her native soil, Ellen thought she could begin anew and discover a new Eden away from the aging customs and stiff judgment of European society. Instead, she discovers that the bourgeois of American society is simply another branch transplanted from the same tree, complete with her own unique oppressions and hostility to those who fail to conform. In Ellen's words, a miserable little country. Privately informed by May herself that Archer is to become a father, she returns to Europe, disillusioned and ultimately alone after Archer's attempt to announce that he will elope with Ellen is thwarted by May's public announcement that she is with child. The novel ends with an epilogue, 26 years following Ellen's departure for Paris and shortly after the death of May. It is revealed that May, on her deathbed, confided in her eldest son Dallas that she knew of Newland's love of cousin Ellen and of the sacrifice he ultimately made in choosing to remain with May. Dallas and Newland go to Paris to meet with Ellen, but ultimately Newland decides not to enter and sends Dallas ahead without him. Choosing to remain within the realm of nostalgia-tinted fantasy and the ghost of his past. He pictured Dallas entering that room with his quick, assured step and high, delightful smile, and wondered if the people were right who said that his boy took after him. Then he tried to see the persons already in the room, for probably at that sociable hour there would be more than one, and among them a dark lady, pale and dark, who would look up quickly, half rise, and hold out a long, thin hand with 3 rings on it. He thought she would be sitting in a sofa corner near the fire, with azaleas banked behind her on a table. "It's more real to me here than if I went up," he suddenly heard himself say. And the fear lest that last shadow of reality should lose its edge kept him rooted to his seat as the minutes succeeded each other. He sat for a long time on the bench in the thickening dusk, his eyes never turning from the balcony. At length a light shone through the windows, and for a moment later a manservant came out on the balcony, drew up the awnings, and closed the shutters. At that, as if it had been the signal he waited for, Newland Archer got up slowly and walked back alone to his hotel.